The courtroom was silent. Judge Harrington, a man in his 60s with sharp gray eyes and a neatly trimmed beard, leaned forward, staring at the teenage girl standing before him. 16-year-old Naomi Carter, dressed in a navy blue blazer that fit just right, stood with her hands clasped in front of her. She was calm, too calm. The judge tapped his gavel lightly, a smirk playing on his lips. "All right, young lady, let's play a game," he said, voice amused but firm. "Truth or lie? I ask, you answer. Think you can outsmart me?" A ripple of laughter spread through the courtroom. The public defender next to Naomi shifted uncomfortably, but Naomi didn't react. She locked eyes with the judge, her expression unreadable. "Sure," she said. Judge Harrington cleared his throat. "First question. The law states that a person is innocent until proven guilty. Truth or lie?" Without hesitation, Naomi answered, "Lie." A murmur ran through the audience. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and why is that?" Naomi tilted her head slightly. "Because in reality, people are treated as guilty first and have to prove their innocence, especially if they look like me." The smirk on the judge's face faltered. A few people in the back shifted in their seats. Others exchanged nervous glances. "All right," the judge said, recovering. "Let's try another. A judge must always be fair and unbiased. Truth or lie?" Naomi's lips curled into the smallest of smiles. "Lie." The judge's fingers tapped against his desk. "Explain." "Judges are human," Naomi said smoothly. "And humans have biases, whether they admit it or not. Like you, for example. You assumed I'm just a kid who doesn't know what she's talking about." The room buzzed with whispers. The judge's jaw tightened. The gavel came down sharply. "Order." The murmurs faded, but Naomi could feel the energy shifting. People were paying attention now. That morning, the courtroom had been packed. Reporters filled the back rows, cameras flashing. The case had drawn attention: an unfair arrest, a child genius, and a judge known for his harsh rulings. Naomi Carter stood between her mother and her court-appointed lawyer, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. She hadn't meant for any of this to happen. She had been at the local library when officers stormed in, accusing her of being involved in a burglary a few blocks away. The evidence? A vague description: a young black girl with braids. Never mind that Naomi had been reading a book on constitutional law when they grabbed her. Never mind that security footage from the library could have cleared her immediately. The moment she was handcuffed, people had already decided she was guilty. The video of her arrest had gone viral. Public outcry followed. But outcry didn't mean justice. Now she stood before Judge Harrington, accused of a crime she didn't commit, staring down a system that wanted her to lose. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Miss Carter, do you understand the charges against you?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And do you have anything to say before we begin?" Naomi hesitated. Then, steady as ever, she said, "I'd like to represent myself." Gasps filled the courtroom. Her mother's hand tightened around her wrist. "Naomi," her mother whispered, "don't do this." Naomi didn't look at her. She had made up her mind. Judge Harrington studied her carefully. "You want to act as your own lawyer?" "Yes." The judge chuckled, shaking his head. "That's bold." "Smart," Naomi corrected. The courtroom went still. The judge leaned back in his chair, amused but intrigued. "All right then, young lady," he said. "Let's see if you're as smart as you think you are." And just like that, it became a game, a test. A battle of wits between a seasoned judge and an 11-year-old girl who refused to be underestimated. But Naomi wasn't here to play. She was here to win. The judge leaned forward, eyes gleaming with amusement. "So, Miss Carter, you want to act as your own lawyer?" "Yes," Naomi said, standing tall, her hands steady at her sides. The judge chuckled. "That's bold." "Smart," Naomi corrected. A few people in the courtroom murmured. Some found her confidence impressive. Others thought it was arrogance. But Naomi didn't care. She wasn't here to impress them. She was here to prove something. Judge Harrington tapped his fingers against the bench, as if considering. "Very well. Let's see if you're as sharp as you think you are." The courtroom shifted. Reporters adjusted their cameras, sensing that something bigger was unfolding. The prosecutor, Daniel Keene, smirked as he stepped forward. He was tall, sharp-featured, and looked far too pleased with himself. "Your Honor," Keene said, voice dripping with condescension, "I would advise against allowing this child to represent herself. Court proceedings are complex, and I'd hate for her to make a mistake that could cost her dearly." Naomi clenched her fists. She had expected resistance, but not this soon. Before she could speak, the judge turned to her. "Do you understand the risks, Miss Carter? If you lose, there are consequences." Naomi nodded. "I understand." The judge studied her, then sighed. "Then so be it." He turned to Keene. "She has chosen to defend herself. Proceed." The smirk on the prosecutor's face widened. "With pleasure, Your Honor." The game had begun. Naomi stepped forward, feeling the weight of 100 eyes on her. Her blazer was still too big, but it didn't matter. Her mind was sharp. She knew the law better than most adults in the room. The problem was, nobody believed her. Not yet. Keene cleared his throat. "Since the defendant has chosen to act as her own attorney, I assume she's ready to deliver her opening statement." Naomi took a breath. "I am." "Then let's hear it," Keene said, folding his arms, waiting for her to stumble. She didn't. "Your Honor," Naomi began, her voice clear, steady. "I stand before you today not just as a defendant, but as proof of a system that does not work the way it claims to." A ripple ran through the courtroom. Keene's smirk twitched. "I was arrested without cause," Naomi continued. "Accused based on nothing but a vague description and an assumption. The assumption? That I was guilty before I even spoke. But today I intend to prove that the law was broken, not by me, but by those who arrested me." The room was silent. Even the reporters had stopped typing. The judge adjusted his glasses. "That's a strong accusation, young lady." Naomi met his gaze. "It's not an accusation, it's a fact." Keene coughed, pretending to look unimpressed. "That's a nice speech, but speeches don't change facts, and the fact is, we have evidence." Naomi tilted her head. "Do you?" Keene's jaw clenched slightly. He gestured to the bailiff. "The prosecution presents surveillance footage placing the defendant near the scene of the crime, as well as a witness who identified her." Naomi stayed still. "Objection." Judge Harrington raised an eyebrow. "On what grounds?" Naomi turned to Keene. "Being near a crime is not the same as committing one." Keene let out a slow sigh, shaking his head. "Miss Carter, the footage clearly shows you at the scene minutes before the robbery, and we have a witness who saw you there. You can't just argue your way out of this." Naomi's heartbeat quickened. This was the moment she had prepared for. "Let's see the footage," she said. The judge nodded. "Proceed." A screen flickered to life. The courtroom leaned in. A grainy black and white video played, showing a figure in a hoodie walking past a convenience store. It was dark. The person's face was barely visible. Keene turned to the jury. "This was taken minutes before the store was broken into. This individual matches the description given by our witness." Naomi folded her arms. "What description?" Keene frowned. "Excuse me? You said I matched the description," Naomi repeated. "So what was the description?" Keene glanced at his notes. "A young black female wearing a hoodie." Naomi inhaled slowly. "So to be clear, the only reason I was arrested was because I'm a black girl in a hoodie?" The courtroom stirred. Someone whispered. Keene's jaw tightened. "You were in the area." "Being in an area isn't a crime," Naomi interrupted. "And since you're so confident, where's this witness?" "I'd like to ask them a few questions." Keene hesitated, just for a second. But Naomi caught it. "The witness will be brought in shortly," he said. Naomi nodded. "Good, because I have a feeling their memory might need some refreshing." The judge lifted a hand. "Let's keep this moving. Mr. Keene, do you have any stronger evidence than a blurry video and a vague description?" The room fell silent. Keene's fingers tightened around his papers. "Not at this time, Your Honor." Naomi smiled slightly. "Interesting." The judge leaned forward. "Since you're so confident, Miss Carter, why don't you tell us where you were at the time of the crime?" Naomi adjusted her blazer. "Gladly. I was at the city library." Keene scoffed. "Can you prove that?" Naomi's eyes locked onto his. "Yes," she said, "and I can prove something even more interesting." The judge narrowed his eyes. "And what's that?" Naomi turned toward the bailiff. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit my library checkout records as evidence." A low gasp rippled through the courtroom. Keene frowned. "How does that prove anything?" Naomi smiled. "Because not only was I at the library, but I checked out a book at the exact time the store was being robbed." She turned back to the judge. "The timestamp is printed on the receipt. It's irrefutable proof that I wasn't there." The judge's lips pressed together. "Bailiff, bring the document forward." The courtroom watched as the bailiff handed the receipt to the judge. He scanned it, his face unreadable. After a long moment, he exhaled. This receipt shows that you checked out a book at 8:42 p.m. Naomi nodded. And the store was robbed at 8:40 p.m. Keen's expression darkened. There's no way I could have done it. The room buzzed again. Keen's jaw clenched. Then suddenly, the courtroom doors burst open. A police officer rushed in, looking frantic. "Your Honor," he called, panting. "We just got a report. The real suspect has been caught." Silence. He already confessed. Naomi didn't move. She just smiled. The courtroom doors slammed open, and Officer Miller rushed in, breathing hard. "Your Honor," he panted, "we just got a report. The real suspect has been caught." He already confessed. A stunned silence gripped the room. Naomi Carter didn't move, her heartbeat steady despite the chaos erupting around her. She let the gasps and murmurs ripple through the gallery, let the jury exchange bewildered glances, let the judge shift in his seat. She was waiting for the lie. Judge Harrington adjusted his glasses. "Officer, are you telling me we've been putting this girl on trial for a crime that someone else just admitted to?" Officer Miller hesitated. "That's what I was told, sir." The judge's fingers tapped against the bench. "Mr. Keen?" His voice was sharp, cutting through the noise. Daniel Keen straightened his tie, the smirk on his face gone. He was too controlled, too careful, and that's when Naomi knew. He already knew about the so-called confession. He just hadn't planned on it being revealed so soon. "Your Honor," Keen said smoothly, "we still have substantial evidence against Miss Carter. The existence of another suspect does not immediately exonerate her." Naomi scoffed, stepping forward. "Are you serious?" All eyes turned to her. "You've spent this entire trial telling everyone I'm guilty," she said, voice calm but sharp. "And now, when the truth comes out, you're still pushing this?" Keen turned to her slowly. "I'm saying that one confession doesn't erase the facts." Naomi tilted her head. "Then let's talk about those facts. Who is this suspect? Where was he caught? What exactly did he confess to?" The prosecutor hesitated. A flicker of frustration crossed his face. Judge Harrington exhaled through his nose. "Officer Miller, do you have those details?" The officer shifted uncomfortably. "Not yet, Your Honor." Naomi folded her arms. "Then get them." The jury was watching Keen now, their skepticism growing. Naomi saw it, and so did he. He wasn't just losing control of the case, he was losing the room. The judge rubbed his temple. "We'll take a short recess. Court will reconvene in 20 minutes. The gavel came down. Naomi turned on her heel, feeling the tension break as people stood and started murmuring to each other. Her mother was by her side in an instant, gripping her wrist. "We need to leave," she whispered. Naomi frowned. "What? We're finally winning." Her mother's eyes darted toward the prosecutor's table, where Keen was speaking quietly with Officer Miller. "Something isn't right," she said. "I don't trust this. I don't trust them." Naomi followed her mother's gaze. Keen's jaw was tight, his posture stiff. He looked irritated, not like a man who had just learned the case was over. She swallowed hard. Her mother wasn't wrong. 15 minutes later, Naomi was outside the courtroom, gripping her phone tightly. She needed information. If the police had arrested someone else, there had to be a record. A name. Details. She dialed Elijah. He picked up on the second ring. "Tell me you just heard that," he said. "I heard," Naomi muttered. "I need you to do something." Elijah sighed. "Why do I feel like this is going to be illegal?" Naomi didn't answer. "Check the police database. See if there's an arrest report for this suspect." Elijah exhaled through his nose. "You owe me." "I always do." She hung up. A few feet away, Keen stepped into the hallway, phone pressed to his ear. Naomi ducked behind a pillar, listening. "No, not yet, but we need to fix this. Yes, before she—" His eyes flicked up. Naomi quickly turned away, pulse racing. "Before she what?" Her phone buzzed. Elijah's voice was hushed. "Naomi, we have a problem." She gripped the phone. "What is it?" "I found the suspect's name. Nathaniel Brooks. 19 years old, arrested for burglary." She frowned. "Okay, so?" Elijah's next words made her blood run cold. "He was arrested an hour before the robbery even happened." The hallway suddenly felt too small, too tight. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Exactly," Elijah said. "They arrested him before the crime, which means either they knew it was going to happen, or they needed a fall guy." Naomi's stomach twisted. Elijah hesitated. "Naomi, I don't think this is just about you anymore." Her grip on the phone tightened. "Send me everything you found." She ended the call just as the courtroom doors opened again. Judge Harrington took his seat, looking even more exhausted than before. "All rise," the bailiff called. Naomi stood, her mind racing. She had walked into this courtroom fighting to clear her name. Now she realized she had just uncovered something much bigger, and someone was trying to bury it. She took a slow breath and straightened her blazer. If they thought she was just going to walk away, they were wrong. The gavel came down, but Naomi Carter wasn't done. "Wait," Judge Harrington sighed, rubbing his temple. "Miss Carter, this case is over. You're free to go." "I know," Naomi said, stepping forward, her voice steady. "But I have a question for Officer Miller." The officer, who had just announced the so-called confession, stiffened. His eyes flickered to Daniel Keene, as if waiting for permission to speak. Naomi caught that. She crossed her arms. "You said the real suspect was caught 15 minutes ago, right?" Miller hesitated. "That's right." "And he confessed on the spot?" Naomi pressed. Miller shifted uncomfortably. Yes." Naomi tilted her head. "That's odd." The murmurs in the courtroom returned. Judge Harrington frowned. "What do you mean, Miss Carter?" Naomi didn't blink. "Because confessions don't usually happen that fast." The silence in the room sharpened. "A suspect caught in the act would deny it," Naomi continued. "Ask for a lawyer, try to negotiate, but this guy, he just confessed immediately?" Keene cut in, his voice tight. "Miss Carter, you are no longer on trial. Let it go." Naomi turned toward him, studying his clenched jaw, the slight twitch in his fingers. He wasn't just annoyed, he was afraid. "No," Naomi said, her voice firm. "Something isn't right, and I want to know what." Her mother tugged on her sleeve. "Naomi, please, we can go home now." Naomi swallowed hard. Her mom was scared. She could feel it in the way her fingers trembled. But Naomi had come too far to stop now. She turned back to Officer Miller. "Where was this suspect caught?" Miller swallowed. 5th Street. Naomi's breath hitched. 5th Street. The opposite side of town from where the robbery took place. Judge Harrington leaned forward. "Miss Carter, are you suggesting—" "I'm suggesting that something isn't adding up," Naomi interrupted. "Or if this suspect was caught committing another crime on 5th Street, how did he have time to confess about the first robbery?" Keene's jaw tightened. "This is ridiculous." Naomi didn't look away. "Did the suspect actually name the store he allegedly robbed?" Miller hesitated. His face paled. Keene shot him a sharp glance. "Answer her." Miller licked his lips. He just said he did it." Naomi exhaled slowly. "So let me get this straight. A man is caught committing a different crime on the other side of town and, out of nowhere, he volunteers a confession for a separate robbery, without being asked, without mentioning the store by name, and without any interrogation?" No one spoke. Naomi took a step forward. "That's not a confession. That's a cover-up." The room erupted. Reporters whispered into their phones, the jury exchanged glances, and Judge Harrington's expression darkened. "Officer Miller," he said, his voice dangerously low, "who ordered you to say this?" Miller's mouth opened and closed, panic flashing in his eyes. He glanced toward the back of the room, and Naomi followed his gaze. The doors burst open. 2 uniformed officers strode in, flanking a tall man in a dark suit. He walked with confidence, like someone who didn't ask for permission. "Captain Reynolds," Keene said, his voice suddenly calm. The man nodded once. "That's enough." The tension in the air thickened. Naomi felt it like a pressure against her chest. Judge Harrington scowled. "Excuse me?" Reynolds' expression didn't change. "This case is closed. The suspect confessed. There's nothing more to discuss." Naomi clenched her fists. "So let me get this straight," she said. "You're telling me that a police captain is personally walking into this courtroom to shut this down?" Reynolds' gaze flickered to her, finally acknowledging her presence. His lips curled slightly. "Go home, Miss Carter." She took a slow breath. He wasn't asking, he was warning. Judge Harrington's jaw clenched. "Captain Reynolds, you are interfering with my courtroom." Reynolds didn't blink. "I'm ensuring this doesn't get out of control." Naomi stared at him. The way he stood, the way he spoke, this wasn't just about her. This was about something bigger. She exhaled. "This isn't about justice." Reynolds smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Justice is about control, Miss Carter. And this?" He gestured around the room. "This is already out of yours." The doors swung shut behind him as he left, his officers trailing behind. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Naomi turned to Judge Harrington. "You see what just happened, right?" The judge's face was unreadable. Naomi pressed on. A police captain just walked in here and shut down this case. That's not normal. That's not how the law works. Judge Harrington rubbed his temples. He was angry. She could see it in the way his fingers twitched. But he was also trapped. He sighed heavily. Miss Carter, this is not just a case anymore. Naomi swallowed. Then that means we have to do something about it. Her mother grabbed her arm. Naomi, please, enough. Naomi turned to her. Mom, something bad already happened. I was arrested for no reason. They wanted to put me away with no evidence. And now the police are covering something up. She shook her head. I can't just walk away. The judge studied her for a long moment. You're really not going to let this go, are you? Naomi squared her shoulders. No, Judge Harrington sighed. Then we need proof. Real proof. Keene scoffed. This case is done. You won. Why are you still digging? Naomi turned to him, her voice sharp. Because I know you knew. Keene's expression faltered. Excuse me? You knew this case was weak, Naomi said. You knew the evidence was trash, but you pushed it anyway. She stepped closer. Who told you to make sure I lost? Gasps rippled through the room. Keene's face turned red. That's ridiculous. But Naomi didn't back down. Judge Harrington leaned forward. Mr. Keene, did someone pressure you to make sure Miss Carter was found guilty? Keene hesitated. Too long. Naomi smiled slightly. That means yes. The air in the courtroom felt heavy, thick with something unspoken. Naomi Carter stood in the center, her fingers clenched at her sides, her heart pounding against her ribs. Across from her, Prosecutor Daniel Keene sat frozen, jaw tight, the weight of the judge's question hanging between them. Mr. Keene, Judge Harrington repeated, his voice edged with suspicion. Did someone pressure you to ensure Miss Carter was found guilty? The prosecutor hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough. Naomi caught it. So did the jury. The room buzzed with tension. Reporters were already scribbling notes, cameras flashing as they captured every flicker of expression on Keene's face. He cleared his throat. Your Honor, this is absurd. The state prosecuted this case based on the evidence available. Naomi stepped forward, her voice sharp. Then why does it feel like you're hiding something? Keene glared at her, but Naomi didn't back down. I'll tell you why, she continued. Because I was never supposed to win. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Keene's fingers curled into fists. You're a child, he snapped. You don't understand how this works. Naomi's gaze didn't waver. You're right, she said, her voice deceptively soft. I don't understand how a prosecutor could knowingly push a weak case. I don't understand how a so-called confession appears out of nowhere just when I was about to prove my innocence. I don't understand how a police captain walks into a courtroom and orders a judge to let it go. She let that hang in the air. You're deflecting, Keene said stiffly. It means someone in this system wanted me convicted, Naomi cut in, and I want to know who. The judge exhaled sharply. Miss Carter, we can't just... The courtroom doors burst open. A uniformed officer hurried in, his face pale. He made a beeline for Captain Reynolds, who stood at the back, arms crossed. Naomi's stomach tightened. Something was happening. The officer leaned in, whispering. Reynolds' face remained unreadable, but Naomi noticed the subtle twitch in his jaw. The judge's eyes narrowed. Captain Reynolds, is there something you'd like to share with the court? The captain straightened, his voice smooth as ever. No, Your Honor. This case has been dismissed. There's nothing left to discuss. The officer hesitated. Then, glancing once at Naomi, he did something she hadn't expected. He turned to the judge instead. Your Honor, the officer said, his voice tense. I think you need to see this. He handed over a thin manila folder. The judge opened it, scanning the contents. His eyes darkened as he flipped through the pages. Then he exhaled, long and slow. Where did you get this? The officer hesitated. It was left on my desk this morning. Naomi's pulse quickened. Reynolds' posture stiffened. Keene shot to his feet. Your Honor, I object to this stunt. We don't even know if that file is legitimate. The judge silenced him with a glare. He turned back to Naomi. Miss Carter, you said you wanted real proof. It seems someone else did too. Slowly, he held up the document for the courtroom to see. A police report. Not just any report. A complaint filed years ago against Captain Reynolds himself. The courtroom erupted. Naomi's mother gasped beside her. The reporters surged forward, trying to catch a glimpse. Naomi's mind raced. This wasn't just about her case anymore. Keen's face was ashen. "This has nothing to do with—" "Enough," the judge snapped. He turned back to the officer. "Tell me exactly what this report contains." The officer swallowed hard. "It's an internal affairs complaint against Captain Reynolds for suppressing evidence in multiple cases." A cold silence filled the room. Naomi felt her breath catch. Keen's hands slammed down on the table. "That document is confidential." "No," Naomi said, stepping forward. "That document is the truth." Reynolds still hadn't moved. He just stood there, watching, calculating. Naomi took a slow breath, her mind clicking through the pieces like a puzzle: the confession, the rushed case, the sudden interference. This wasn't just about hiding mistakes. This was about protecting power. She turned to Reynolds. "How many cases have you buried?" The captain smiled. It wasn't friendly. "You should go home, Miss Carter." Judge Harrington's voice was cold. "You should sit down, Captain." For the first time, Reynolds' expression flickered, just slightly. The judge faced Naomi. "Miss Carter, you've brought this case to light, but if we're going to take down corruption, we need undeniable proof." Naomi nodded. "Then let's start with that report." The judge turned to the bailiff. "Get internal affairs in here." Keen's face twisted. "Your Honor, you don't." "I said enough, Mr. Keen." The tension in the room shifted. Naomi felt it. She had forced the system to look at itself. And now? Now, they weren't just fighting her. They were fighting the truth. The courtroom was suffocatingly silent. Naomi Carter could feel the weight of every gaze on her, the tension thick enough to choke. Captain Reynolds stood stiff, unreadable, but Naomi saw it: the tightness in his jaw, the barely concealed irritation in his posture. The internal affairs complaint sat on the judge's desk, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Judge Harrington exhaled slowly, his fingers pressed together. "This report," he said, voice carefully measured, "alleges that evidence was suppressed in multiple cases under Captain Reynolds' command." His gaze flickered toward the officer who had brought it forward. "And you claim this was left anonymously on your desk?" The officer nodded, shifting on his feet. Keen scoffed. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. We have no way of verifying if—" Naomi's voice cut through. "If it's fake?" She folded her arms, her eyes never leaving Reynolds. "Then why does he look so nervous?" Reynolds didn't move. He didn't need to. The tension in his silence said everything. Judge Harrington turned toward him. "Captain, do you have a response to these allegations?" Reynolds lifted his chin. "I do." "This is a waste of time." Naomi tilted her head. "You didn't answer the question." Reynolds' lips curled slightly, almost amused. "And I don't have to." The judge's fingers tapped against the desk. "Actually, Captain, you do." The room held its breath. Reynolds' expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, Your Honor." Judge Harrington straightened, his authority sharp. "That sounded like a threat." Keen stood abruptly. "This case is over. The defendant has been cleared. We have no reason to continue entertaining baseless distractions." Naomi didn't flinch. "It's only a distraction if there's nothing to find." The doors opened again. A different officer entered, moving quickly to the judge's bench and handing over another folder. He whispered something too low for Naomi to hear. The judge's face darkened. He flipped through the papers. Then he lifted his gaze to Keen and Reynolds. "This is getting worse by the second," he muttered. Keen forced a laugh, though it was brittle. "Your Honor, The judge held up a hand. "Save it." He turned to the officer. "What am I looking at?" The officer hesitated, then spoke. "It's a record of missing evidence logs, Your Honor. Dozens of cases." Murmurs rippled through the room. Naomi's heart pounded. She had suspected something was wrong, but this was bigger than she had imagined. Reynolds finally moved, stepping forward with the easy confidence of a man who knew exactly how much power he held. "This is a procedural misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "These logs mean nothing without context." Naomi's stomach twisted. He wasn't denying it. Judge Harrington leaned back, arms crossed. "Then I assume you'd have no problem answering a few questions from Internal Affairs?" For the first time, Reynolds hesitated. Keen cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this is turning into a witch hunt." Naomi didn't blink. "Witches don't leave paper trails." The courtroom erupted into noise. The judge slammed his gavel twice. "Enough." His voice cut through the chaos. "We're adjourning for an hour while I decide how to proceed." The gavel came down again. And just like that, the moment shattered. Naomi exhaled, feeling the tension shift. She should have felt relieved. The system was finally looking at itself. But as she turned, she caught something. Something small, something dangerous. Reynolds was looking at her. Not like a man caught in a scandal, like a man making calculations. She forced herself to hold his gaze. Reynolds smiled. Not friendly, not amused, just knowing. Then he walked out. Her mother gripped her wrist. "Naomi, we need to leave, now." Naomi's pulse quickened. "Now." The hallway outside was quieter than it should have been. Naomi followed her mother toward the exit, but her mind was spinning. Something was off. She could feel it. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she spotted them. Two men. Dark suits. Watching. Her breath hitched. Her mother saw them too. Her grip on Naomi's wrist tightened. "Keep walking," she whispered. They pushed through the heavy courthouse doors, stepping into the sharp afternoon light. The city buzzed around them. Cars, people, movement. But Naomi felt it. They were being followed. She turned slightly, enough to confirm it. The men were still there. She forced herself to breathe. Her mother pulled out her phone, dialing someone. "Terrence," she said quickly, "meet us at the diner on 8th. Now." Naomi's uncle? Good. They walked fast, moving through the crowded streets, weaving between people. Naomi kept her posture relaxed, her expression normal. Act natural. Act normal. They turned a corner. The diner was just ahead. Then a black SUV pulled up to the curb. Naomi's heart slammed against her ribs. The back door opened, and Captain Reynolds stepped out. Her mother stopped cold. Naomi's fingers curled into fists. Reynolds adjusted his cuffs, glancing around as if he had all the time in the world. "Miss Carter," he said casually, "I think it's time we had a talk." Naomi Carter didn't move. Neither did her mother. The street around them was alive with traffic, people rushing past, horns blaring, but it all felt distant. The only thing Naomi saw was Captain Reynolds standing beside the black SUV, his expression unreadable. He wasn't holding a weapon, he wasn't shouting, but Naomi knew power when she saw it. The real kind. The kind that didn't need threats. Her mother's grip on her wrist was tight. "We're not talking to you," she said, her voice low. Reynolds smiled, tilting his head. "That's a shame, because I think you'd like what I have to say." Naomi forced herself to breathe evenly. "I don't think I would." His eyes flickered with amusement. "That's what I like about you, Carter. You don't scare easy." A man in a dark suit shifted behind him, waiting. Reynolds took a slow step forward. "Let me give you some advice, kid. There are things in this world bigger than you, bigger than me, and when you start poking around places you don't belong, people notice." Naomi held his gaze. "Like whoever left that report on the officer's desk?" For the first time, something in Reynolds' expression shifted. Barely, but enough. "You think you've figured something out?" he mused. "That's cute." Naomi's mother pulled her back a step. "Come near my daughter again, and I'll make sure the whole world sees what you're trying to hide." Reynolds' smirk didn't fade, but he lifted his hands in surrender. "Relax, I'm just here to chat." Behind him, the black SUV door clicked open. The suited man stepped aside. "A ride home, Miss Carter?" Reynolds offered. "No tricks, no handcuffs, just a conversation." Naomi's stomach twisted. He wanted her to get in that car. She wasn't stupid. "No thanks," she said, her voice steady. "I don't take rides from criminals." A beat of silence. Then Reynolds chuckled. "Smart girl." He turned without another word, sliding into the back seat of the SUV. The door shut, and the car pulled into traffic, disappearing. Naomi let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her mother grabbed her shoulders, turning her to face her. "Are you okay?" Naomi nodded, but her mind was spinning. Something had changed. Reynolds wasn't just trying to intimidate her, he was trying to test her. And that meant he wasn't sure who was pulling the strings anymore. Her mother pulled out her phone. "We're going home." "No," Naomi said immediately. Her mother's eyes flashed. "Naomi, I can't just sit at home and pretend this isn't happening." Her mother exhaled sharply. "You need to be careful." Naomi knew that, but she also knew something else. She wasn't safe no matter where she went. And if someone had left that report for the judge, that meant she wasn't the only one who wanted the truth out. She needed answers. She needed Elijah. 15 minutes later, Naomi slid into a booth at the diner on 8th Street across from her best friend. Elijah, wearing his usual hoodie, raised an eyebrow as she dropped into the seat. "So," he said, "how's life as public enemy number 1? Naomi exhaled. "Getting weirder by the second." Elijah smirked. I assume that means you want something. She nodded. I need you to check something for me. Elijah leaned back. You know, normal kids ask for favors like borrowing notes, not hacking police databases. Naomi gave him a look. He sighed. Fine, what am I looking for? She lowered her voice. The real suspect, Nathaniel Brooks, the guy they supposedly arrested. Elijah's fingers flew across his phone. Already checked, remember? He was arrested before the crime even happened. That alone is shady. Check again. Naomi's chest felt tight. I think there's more to it. Elijah muttered under his breath but kept typing. Naomi drummed her fingers against the table, her mind racing. Reynolds had tried to scare her. That meant he was worried. But about what? A moment later, Elijah's face changed. Naomi sat up. What? Elijah turned his phone around. No criminal history, he said, voice lower now. No priors, no mugshot. He scrolled down. And oh, you're gonna love this. His file was sealed yesterday. Naomi's stomach dropped. Sealed? Yep. Elijah tapped the screen. Someone made sure no one could dig deeper. A cold chill ran down Naomi's spine. Then that means one of two things. Elijah nodded grimly. Either this guy doesn't exist, or he was never supposed to. They sat there for a long moment, the weight of it settling in. Naomi took a deep breath. Can you break through the seal? Elijah looked at her. You're asking me to commit an actual felony. Is that a no? Elijah sighed dramatically. Of course not. Give me a second. Naomi forced herself to stay calm as he worked. The diner felt suddenly smaller, like the walls were closing in. A minute passed. Then another. Elijah froze. Naomi's stomach twisted. What? Elijah turned his phone so she could see. His face was pale. They knew someone would look, he said quietly. Naomi stared at the screen. A single message was displayed. Stop digging. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Elijah swallowed hard. Okay, not to freak you out, but that wasn't there a second ago. Naomi's throat felt dry. Someone was watching them. The front door of the diner opened, and Naomi's body went rigid. A man in a dark coat stepped inside. Not a cop, not in uniform. But Naomi didn't need a badge to know what he was. He scanned the diner, his eyes landing on their table. Elijah, she whispered. He saw him too. Yeah, time to go. They slid out of the booth fast, moving toward the side exit. Naomi's heart pounded as she reached for the door, but it didn't budge. Locked. She spun back. The man was already walking toward them. Elijah, she said, voice tight. He glanced around, eyes darting toward the kitchen. Back door. They ran. Behind them she heard footsteps. This wasn't just about the trial anymore. This was bigger, and someone wanted her gone. The kitchen door burst open as Naomi Carter and Elijah slipped through, their footsteps muffled by the hum of sizzling grease and clattering dishes. A line cook shot them an annoyed glance, but Naomi didn't stop. The sharp scent of onions and burnt toast filled the air as she weaved past a steaming fryer. Elijah? She hissed. Back exit? Through there, he muttered, jerking his head toward a narrow hallway. Behind them, the door to the main diner swung open. The man in the dark coat stepped inside. Naomi's pulse pounded as they darted into the hallway. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, buzzing like trapped insects. The exit sign glowed red at the end. Almost there. Then she heard the lock click. She reached for the door handle. It wouldn't budge. Elijah swore under his breath. They locked it from the outside. A shadow stretched down the hall. Naomi turned. The man was standing at the entrance, blocking the only way out. His face was unreadable, but Naomi knew that kind of look, the calm before something bad. No sudden moves, kids, he said, voice smooth. Elijah shifted beside her. Naomi, her brain raced. They were boxed in. No windows, no back exit, unless her eyes darted to a metal shelf stacked with crates of bottled soda. It wasn't much, but it was tall enough to reach the air vent above. Elijah followed her gaze. You're joking. Naomi wasn't. Help me up. He cursed but crouched down, locking his fingers together. She stepped onto his hands, pushing off as he lifted. Her fingers scraped against the vent's edge, almost. The man took a step forward. I wouldn't do that. Naomi gritted her teeth, stretching higher. Another step. Elijah braced himself. Naomi, hurry. The man lunged. Elijah reacted fast, kicking a crate off the shelf. Glass shattered against the tile floor, soda spraying everywhere. The man flinched, slipping on the mess. It was all Naomi needed. Her fingers hooked onto the vent's ledge. With one final pull, she hauled herself up, gripping the metal frame. Elijah leaped next, grabbing her hand. She pulled with everything she had, her muscles screaming. Footsteps pounded below. A hand shot out, grazing Elijah's sneaker. Then they were inside. Naomi scrambled forward, the metal duct rattling beneath her weight. Elijah squeezed in behind her, breathing hard. Below, the man cursed. "You've got to be kidding me." A second later, something heavy slammed against the vent. They kept crawling. The air was thick with dust, making Naomi's throat burn. Sweat trickled down her back as she moved forward, inch by inch. "Where does this lead?" Elijah muttered. "Out," Naomi whispered. At least, she hoped. Another bang. The vent shuddered. Naomi swallowed. They weren't waiting for them to come down. They were breaking in. Elijah's breathing was shallow behind her. Faster. She didn't need to be told twice. Light flickered ahead. A grate leading to the alley. Freedom. Naomi lunged for it, pressing her hands against the rusted frame. It didn't move. Locked. Of course it was locked. "Elijah?" "I got it," he muttered, shifting beside her. He pulled a Swiss Army knife from his pocket, flipping open the screwdriver attachment. Below, metal groaned. Naomi's stomach twisted. If they got in before Elijah got the grate off, hurry. Elijah's hands moved fast, loosening the screws one by one. Another bang. Naomi felt the vent dip slightly beneath them. Another screw fell loose. She glanced back. A shadow was moving beneath the vent. One more. Just one more. The final screw popped free. Naomi kicked out. The grate crashed onto the pavement outside. Sunlight poured in. They didn't hesitate. Elijah dropped first, landing in a crouch. Naomi followed, her sneakers hitting the ground just as a loud crack echoed behind her. They ran. The alley was narrow, damp, the smell of garbage thick in the air. Naomi pushed forward, feet slamming against concrete. Behind them, the kitchen door burst open. More than one set of footsteps followed. Naomi's chest ached as she sprinted. Elijah was a step ahead, already scanning for an escape. "There," he gasped, pointing. A chain-link fence blocked the alley's end, tall and rusted. No time to think. Elijah jumped first, gripping the metal and hauling himself up. Naomi followed, the rough steel biting into her palms. Voices shouted behind them. Halfway up, Naomi's foot slipped. Her stomach lurched. Elijah grabbed her arm. "Come on," he gritted out. She scrambled higher, pushing through the burn in her muscles. Then hands grabbed at her ankle. Panic shot through her. She kicked out, connecting with something solid. A grunt, a curse. Then she was over the top, dropping down beside Elijah. They hit the pavement and kept running. A few blocks later, they ducked into a bus stop, lungs burning. Naomi braced her hands on her knees, her pulse wild. Elijah wiped sweat from his brow. "Okay," he panted. "New rule, no more diners." Naomi almost laughed, but then she remembered the look in Reynolds' eyes. This wasn't over. It was just getting started. The city pulsed around them, but Naomi Carter couldn't hear anything over the pounding in her ears. She and Elijah ducked into the bus shelter, both bent over, gasping for breath. Their bodies ached from the sprint, their clothes damp with sweat. Elijah wiped his face with the sleeve of his hoodie. "Tell me again why we thought hacking a police file was a good idea?" Naomi didn't answer. Her mind was still spinning. The sealed record. The message telling them to stop digging. The man who had chased them. They weren't running from a mistake. They were running from something real. Elijah nudged her. "Naomi." She blinked, snapping back. "What?" He nodded toward the street. The black SUV was back, idling a block away. Naomi's stomach clenched. "They found us again?" Elijah shifted. "I don't think they ever lost us." She scanned the area. The bus stop was too exposed and their faces were all over the news. They needed to move. Fast. A bus rumbled down the street, tires hissing as it pulled to the curb. Naomi didn't hesitate. She grabbed Elijah's wrist and yanked him toward the open doors. "Wait, what?" "Get on." They climbed up, shoving crumpled bills into the machine. The driver barely glanced at them before pulling away from the curb. Naomi peeked over her shoulder. The SUV didn't follow. Not yet. She and Elijah dropped into the back row. The other passengers barely noticed them. An older woman flipping through a newspaper, a guy with headphones lost in his music, a couple whispering to each other. Elijah leaned in. "Where are we even going?" Naomi stared out the window, her mind racing. "Somewhere safe." His eyebrows shot up. "Oh, great, super specific." The city blurred past. Naomi clenched her fists. They couldn't go home. They couldn't go to the police. And now, they couldn't even stay in public without being hunted. Then a thought hit her. Her Aunt Vanessa, a former defense attorney, one of the best in the city before she mysteriously dropped off the grid. She still had connections. Naomi pulled out her phone and sent a quick text. Need help? Not safe. Where are you? 3 dots appeared almost instantly, then a reply. My place. Come alone. Naomi exhaled. I got us somewhere. Elijah watched her. You sure about this? She wasn't, but she had no choice. 30 minutes later, they climbed off the bus in a neighborhood Naomi barely recognized. Old buildings lined the street, the sidewalks cracked from years of wear. A convenience store flickered with a neon open sign, but otherwise, the block was quiet. Naomi checked the address twice before leading Elijah down an alley. This feels sketchy, he muttered. She ignored him, stopping in front of a metal door covered in chipped paint. She knocked twice. Silence. Then the lock clicked. The door cracked open just enough for Naomi to see sharp eyes staring at her. Then, slowly, it opened wider. Vanessa Carter stood in the doorway, arms crossed. You brought a friend. Naomi swallowed. I trust him. Vanessa studied Elijah for a moment, then sighed. Get in. They stepped inside. The apartment was small but neat. Stacks of legal books lined the shelves, alongside boxes labeled with years. The air smelled like old paper and coffee. Vanessa shut the door and locked it behind them. Talk. Naomi hesitated, then she told her everything. The trial. The fake confession. Captain Reynolds. The chase. The sealed file. By the time she finished, Vanessa was pacing. This is worse than I thought, she muttered. Naomi frowned. You knew something? Vanessa rubbed her temples. Not everything, but enough to know you just kicked a hornet's nest. Naomi's chest tightened. Who are they? Vanessa exhaled. People who don't like unfinished business. Elijah leaned forward. You think they'll come after us again? Vanessa's jaw tightened. I think they never stopped. A chill ran down Naomi's spine. Vanessa grabbed a duffel bag from under the couch. You can't stay here long. If they know you're digging, they'll find you. Naomi's pulse quickened. Then what do we do? Vanessa pulled out a folder and handed it to her. You keep moving, and you find this man. Naomi opened it. A grainy photo of an older man stared back. He looked tired, worn. But his name, her stomach dropped. Nathaniel Brooks. Elijah cursed under his breath. Wait, how? Vanessa crossed her arms. The man they arrested doesn't exist. Naomi's hands trembled as she stared at the picture. The real Nathaniel Brooks disappeared 10 years ago. A heavy silence filled the room. Elijah ran a hand over his face. So they just pulled his name out of thin air? Vanessa nodded. Because they thought no one would look for him. Naomi's pulse roared in her ears. She'd started this to clear her name. Now she was chasing a ghost. Naomi Carter stared at the grainy photo in her hands. The name printed underneath sent a cold wave through her body. Nathaniel Brooks. But not the one the police had arrested. Not the fake suspect. The real one. A man who had vanished 10 years ago. Elijah leaned over her shoulder, his breath shallow. This doesn't make sense. How can a guy disappear for a decade and suddenly be the key to all of this? Vanessa sat on the couch, arms crossed, because someone wanted him erased. Naomi swallowed. Why? Vanessa didn't answer immediately. Instead, she got up, walking over to a cabinet near the window. She opened a drawer, pulling out a thick file. I don't know everything, she admitted, flipping through the papers. But I know this. Nathaniel Brooks used to be a detective. Naomi's grip on the photo tightened. Elijah exhaled. Of course he was. Vanessa continued, her voice calm but edged with something Naomi couldn't place. He worked corruption cases, internal affairs. Then one day he disappeared. No body, no missing persons report. Just gone. Naomi felt her pulse hammering. And you think Captain Reynolds had something to do with it? Vanessa's gaze met hers. I think Reynolds didn't start being dirty last week. Silence pressed against the walls. Elijah shook his head. Okay, let's say Reynolds and his people buried this guy years ago. Why use his name now? Naomi's mind raced. Maybe they thought no one would check. Maybe they thought he was gone for good. Elijah frowned. Or maybe he's not. The air in the room shifted. Vanessa closed the file. You need to leave. Naomi blinked. What? Vanessa's jaw was tight. If you two could find this, so could they. And you showing up here just put a target on my back. Naomi's stomach twisted. I can handle myself, Vanessa continued, but you need to go dark. No phones, no credit cards, nothing that tracks you. If Reynolds thinks you're still in the city, you won't make it another day without them finding you. Elijah exhaled sharply. So what? We just disappear? Vanessa looked at Naomi. You want the truth? Find Brooks. If he's still alive, he's the only one who can tell you what really happened. A weight settled in Naomi's chest. They weren't just running anymore. They were hunting. Vanessa handed Naomi a slip of paper. An address. Last known place he was seen. Naomi studied the numbers. This is a town 3 hours from here, Vanessa confirmed. It's small, off the grid. If Brooks is out there, he's hiding for a reason. Elijah rubbed a hand down his face. I hate everything about this plan. Naomi folded the paper, shoving it into her pocket. Then you can stay. Elijah gave her a flat look. Yeah, like I'd let you get killed alone. Vanessa walked to the window, pulling the curtain back an inch. Her whole body went still. Naomi's chest tightened. What? Time's up. Naomi rushed over. A black SUV idled at the curb, not moving, not honking, just waiting. Elijah's voice was low. We're made. Vanessa turned, moving fast. Back door. Now. Naomi didn't need to be told twice. They grabbed their bags and rushed through the kitchen, pushing out into a side alley. The smell of damp pavement and gasoline filled Naomi's lungs. Footsteps echoed behind them. Not running, not rushing, just following. Elijah grabbed Naomi's arm. We need a car. Her mind spun. Public transport was too easy to track. They needed distance. Vanessa tossed him a set of keys. Silver sedan, 2 streets over. Get out of the city. Naomi hesitated. You should come with us. Vanessa shook her head. I'll slow you down. Naomi's throat tightened. Elijah tugged her arm. We gotta go. She clenched her jaw. Then, without another word, she ran. They cut through the alley, hearts pounding, reaching the car in under 2 minutes. Elijah jumped into the driver's seat. Naomi barely had time to slam the passenger door shut before the engine roared to life. Then the headlights in the mirror flickered on. They weren't alone. The SUV peeled around the corner, speeding toward them. Elijah cursed and floored it. Naomi braced herself as they shot down the empty street, tires screeching. The SUV followed. Elijah yanked the wheel, swerving onto a side street. The SUV matched their every move. Naomi's heart pounded. They're not backing off. Elijah's grip tightened. Then neither am I. The city blurred around them, neon signs flashing past. Up ahead, a train crossing. The red lights flickered. Naomi's breath caught. Don't. Elijah didn't blink. The guardrail started lowering. The train was seconds away. Naomi's nails dug into the seat. Elijah clenched his jaw and hit the gas. The car shot forward, tires screaming as they hurtled toward the tracks. The train's horn blared. Naomi's breath locked in her throat. The car rocketed forward and cleared the crossing just as the train thundered past behind them, cutting off the SUV. Naomi twisted in her seat, watching as the headlights on the other side flickered, trapped. Elijah let out a shaky laugh. Holy, Naomi exhaled. Drive. They sped into the night, leaving the city behind. But Naomi knew the truth. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The city lights disappeared in the rearview mirror as Naomi Carter stared out into the dark stretch of highway ahead. The adrenaline from the chase still clung to her skin, her heart beating like a war drum inside her chest. Beside her, Elijah gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. Neither of them spoke. Not about the train, not about how close they had come to being caught. Not about how, for the first time since this started, Naomi felt like they weren't just being hunted, they were being tracked. Elijah finally broke the silence. We need gas. Naomi blinked. What? He nodded at the dashboard. The fuel gauge hovered dangerously close to empty. Her stomach tightened. Stopping wasn't safe, but breaking down in the middle of nowhere was worse. A green road sign flashed by, the words barely visible under the glow of the headlights. Gas station, 2 miles. Elijah exhaled. We stop fast. No talking to strangers. No looking like fugitives. Naomi gave him a flat look. Yeah, let me just take off my wanted sign. Elijah snorted, but the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. Minutes later, the gas station appeared like a ghost on the side of the road. A single flickering light buzzed above the pumps, the convenience store sitting eerily quiet in the background. No other cars, no movement. Naomi didn't like it. Elijah pulled up to the pump and shut off the engine. The silence that followed felt suffocating. He handed her a crumpled bill. Get snacks. I'll fill up. Naomi hesitated. I don't think splitting up is a great idea. Elijah forced a smirk. Come on, Carter. You scared? She rolled her eyes, but something in her gut twisted. Still, she grabbed the money and slipped out of the car. The door creaked louder than it should have in the dead silence. She stepped inside the store. The air smelled like stale chips and cleaning solution. A small TV in the corner played a rerun of some sitcom, the volume barely above a whisper. Behind the counter, an old man glanced up. His eyes flicked to her for half a second before returning to his newspaper. Naomi forced herself to act normal. She walked down the aisles, grabbing bottled water, a couple of protein bars, and a bag of pretzels. Her hands felt clammy. Something wasn't right. She moved toward the counter, forcing a smile as she handed over the cash. The old man took it without a word, his fingers moving slower than necessary as he counted change. Naomi's skin prickled, too slow, too deliberate. A cold sensation crawled up her spine. She turned her head just slightly, just enough to see the convex security mirror hanging in the corner. A reflection stared back, not hers. The old man wasn't alone. A figure stood near the back of the store, half hidden behind a rack of canned goods, watching. Naomi's pulse spiked. She grabbed her change, forcing herself to walk, not run, toward the door. The moment she stepped outside, she whispered, "Elijah, we need to go, now." Elijah, still pumping gas, frowned. "What? Inside? Someone's watching." He followed her gaze, muscles tensing. "Are you sure?" The store door creaked open behind her. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She saw Elijah's face go pale. He dropped the pump nozzle. Naomi's breath caught. "Elijah," he grabbed her wrist. "Get in the car." The man from the store stepped out under the gas station lights. Naomi saw him clearly now. Tall, dressed in a dark jacket, eyes locked onto her like she was a puzzle he was about to solve. Not a cop, not some random guy, someone else. Naomi didn't wait. She yanked open the passenger door, shoving inside as Elijah threw himself behind the wheel. The man took a step forward. Elijah turned the key. The engine didn't start. Naomi's stomach dropped. "No, no, no." Elijah twisted the key again. Nothing. The man kept walking. Naomi's heart slammed against her ribs. They cut the engine. Elijah cursed. The man reached into his jacket. Naomi's breath locked in her throat. Then headlights flooded the lot. Another car. Fast. The man stopped. Elijah didn't. He threw the door open, grabbing Naomi's wrist as he bolted. The second car skidded to a stop. The driver's side door flew open. "Vanessa, move," she shouted. Naomi didn't think. She ran. The man in the dark jacket hesitated, eyes flickering between them and Vanessa. Then he turned and disappeared into the night. Elijah dove into the back seat. Naomi barely had time to slam the door shut before Vanessa hit the gas, tires screeching as they tore out of the lot. No one spoke. Naomi's hands shook. Elijah exhaled a curse. What the hell was that? Vanessa's grip tightened on the wheel. "I told you, you're not the only ones looking for Brooks." Naomi forced herself to breathe. "You followed us." Vanessa didn't answer. Elijah ran a hand down his face. "That guy, he wasn't a cop. He wasn't Reynolds." Naomi's chest tightened. "Then who was he?" Vanessa's jaw clenched. "Someone who doesn't want you getting to Brooks first." Silence. Then Vanessa muttered almost to herself, "Which means he's still alive." The hum of the engine filled the car as Vanessa drove, her hands tight on the wheel. Naomi Carter sat in the passenger seat, staring at the headlights slicing through the darkness. Elijah was slumped in the back, arms crossed, breathing unevenly. No one had spoken since they left the gas station. Naomi's fingers tapped against her knee. The weight of what had just happened pressed on her chest. She finally broke the silence. "Who was that guy?" Vanessa exhaled through her nose. "Could be a bounty hunter. Could be someone working for Reynolds. Could be worse." Naomi swallowed. "Worse?" Vanessa glanced at her. "If Brooks is alive, then someone else knows it too. And if they don't want you finding him first, it means he knows something big. Something worth killing for." The words settled heavy in the air. Elijah shook his head. "This is insane. We're kids. We shouldn't be involved in whatever this is." Naomi turned to him. "You can leave if you want?" His jaw clenched. "You know I'm not going anywhere." She nodded, grateful, but the tension didn't ease. Vanessa didn't slow down until they were miles outside the city, pulling onto a deserted back road surrounded by trees. The headlights hit a small, rusted-out payphone booth near a shut-down gas station. "She killed the engine." "Get out." Elijah frowned. "Seriously?" Vanessa didn't respond. She grabbed her bag and stepped outside. Naomi and Elijah exchanged a look before following. The air was cold, the smell of damp earth thick. Vanessa leaned against the hood. No more phones, no cards, no digital footprint. Elijah groaned. "That again?" Vanessa ignored him and pulled a flip phone from her pocket. Only use burners. Nothing traceable. She handed it to Naomi. Memorize the number. If you ever get separated, this is the only way to reach me. Naomi took the phone, swallowing hard. You really think it's that bad? Vanessa's expression didn't change. I know it is. The wind rustled through the trees. Naomi hugged her arms, her mind racing. Elijah shifted beside her. So what now? Vanessa nodded toward the road. Now you get to Brooks before they do. Naomi exhaled. And if he's dead? Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line. Then you're out of options. The words sent a chill down Naomi's spine. Vanessa pushed off the hood. You need to move fast. If someone's tracking you, they won't be far behind. Naomi hesitated. And what about you? Vanessa's eyes flickered toward the trees. I'll handle things on my end. Cover your trail. Elijah looked unimpressed. That's vague and not at all comforting. Vanessa smirked slightly. You'll live. She reached into her bag and pulled out a set of keys, tossing them to Naomi. Use the car, she said, but ditch it before sunrise. Switch vehicles at least twice before you get to that town. Naomi caught the keys, her pulse quickening. Vanessa's voice softened. And Naomi? She looked up. Vanessa held her gaze. Be smart. Naomi nodded, throat tight. They climbed back into the car and Vanessa stepped away, disappearing into the night. Naomi started the engine. The weight of the keys in her hand felt heavier than it should. Elijah let out a slow breath. Tell me you actually know how to drive. Naomi's grip tightened on the wheel. I know enough. The road stretched before them, empty and endless. She pressed the gas. The car rumbled forward, carrying them deeper into the unknown. But one thing was clear. They weren't running anymore. They were chasing something bigger than they ever imagined. And the people in the dark? They were already waiting. The road stretched ahead like an endless black ribbon. The hum of the tires the only sound between them. Naomi Carter kept her hands tight on the wheel, her mind spinning as the darkness swallowed the rearview mirror. They had switched cars twice already, ditching Vanessa's sedan in a parking lot, taking an old pickup Elijah hot-wired from behind a diner, then swapping it out again at a rest stop for a beat-up station wagon with a cracked windshield. It wasn't enough. Her gut told her they were still being followed. Elijah shifted in the passenger seat. We should stop soon. Naomi kept her eyes on the road. No. Elijah sighed. We can't just keep driving forever. Naomi exhaled through her nose. We don't stop until we get to Brooks. Elijah ran a hand through his hair. And then what? What if we find him and he's just some washed-up guy with no answers? Naomi tightened her grip on the wheel. Then at least we'll know. The highway signs changed, signaling they were nearing the town. Small, quiet, the kind of place where people didn't ask questions. Elijah glanced at the gas gauge. We're running low. Naomi bit the inside of her cheek. They couldn't risk another gas station run like last time. A dimly lit motel sign flickered on the horizon. She made a decision. We stopped there. For an hour. That's it. Elijah didn't argue. The parking lot was mostly empty. Just a few trucks and an old sedan with a dented bumper. Naomi pulled into a spot near the back, scanning the area. Nothing suspicious. Yet. Elijah ran a hand over his face. I'll get the key. Naomi shook her head. I'll go. You check the car. Make sure no one messed with it. Elijah muttered something under his breath, but climbed out. Naomi stepped into the dimly lit lobby. A bell jingled as she approached the front desk, where a tired-looking woman barely glanced up. Room? Naomi nodded, sliding over some cash. One night. The woman took the money, handing over a key. No questions. No ID. Perfect. Naomi took the key and turned. The door creaked open behind her. A chill ran up her spine. She didn't turn around. Instead, she caught a reflection in the dusty mirror behind the counter. A man. Tall. Worn-out jacket, a scar just below his left eye. Watching. Her fingers tightened around the key. She forced herself to walk, not run, out the door. Elijah was waiting by the car. Everything good? Naomi nodded, voice tight. Let's go. They climbed the stairs, reaching the room. Naomi slipped inside first, scanning every corner. No cameras, no hidden threats. Just an old bed, a flickering lamp, and a bathroom with a rust-stained sink. Elijah shut the door behind them, locking it twice. Okay, he said. What's wrong? Naomi took a slow breath. Someone was watching me in the lobby. Elijah's expression darkened. Reynolds people? I don't know, but we're not staying long. Elijah nodded, rubbing his temples. This is the worst road trip ever. Naomi almost laughed. Almost. A sudden knock at the door made them both freeze. Elijah's hand moved toward the lamp, ready to grab it as a weapon. Naomi crept forward, pressing her eye to the peephole. Her stomach dropped. The man from the lobby, standing there, waiting. She stepped back, heart hammering. "It's him." Elijah tensed. "We need to go." The man knocked again. Then, a voice, low, calm. "If you want to find Brooks, you need to come with me." Naomi's breath caught. Elijah whispered, "What if it's a trap?" Naomi hesitated. Then she cracked the door open an inch. "Who are you?" The man's scarred face didn't change. "Someone who wants Reynolds gone just as much as you do." Silence. Naomi's pulse pounded. Then she did something reckless. She opened the door. Naomi Carter stood in the doorway, the cold air from the motel hallway creeping in around her. The man with the scar didn't move, his hands stuffed into his jacket pockets, his expression unreadable. Elijah stood just behind her, every muscle in his body tense. Naomi's fingers hovered near the doorframe. "Who are you?" The man's eyes flickered to the room behind her, scanning. "You want to find Brooks?" His voice was low, steady. "Then you're going the wrong way." Elijah scoffed. "Oh, so you're here to help? How convenient." The man didn't react. "Reynolds has people looking for you. You stay here any longer, you won't make it out of this town." Naomi's pulse quickened. "How do you know that?" A pause. Then, "Because I used to work for him." Elijah let out a breath. "Well, that's not suspicious at all." Naomi hesitated. Every instinct told her not to trust him. But something about the way he stood, calm, patient, like he wasn't afraid of them running, made her listen. She narrowed her eyes. "If you worked for Reynolds, why aren't you turning us in?" The man exhaled through his nose. "Because Reynolds doesn't want you arrested. He wants you gone." His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. "And he's sending someone who doesn't miss." Naomi's stomach twisted. "An assassin?" The man's jaw tightened. "Something like that." Elijah shifted. "Okay, great chat. So why are you here?" The man hesitated, just for a second. Then he said, "Because I owe Brooks." Silence filled the room. Naomi studied him. He didn't look desperate. He didn't look like he was lying. He looked like a man who had already lost too much. She stepped back, opening the door a little wider. "Talk." The man walked inside. His presence made the room feel smaller, heavier. He glanced at the rundown furniture before leaning against the wall, arms crossed. "Elijah's right. You can't trust me," he said plainly. "But I don't need you to. I need you to listen." Naomi crossed her arms. "Go on." The man nodded. "My name's Owen. I worked under Reynolds for years. I saw how he operated, how he covered things up. I followed orders," he exhaled, "until the day he ordered me to bury Brooks." Naomi felt a chill. Elijah frowned. "Wait, bury him?" Owen's eyes darkened. "Brooks didn't just disappear. He was taken. And when Reynolds wanted him gone for good, I couldn't do it." Naomi's hands clenched into fists. "So where is he?" Owen shook his head. "I don't know. I helped him escape, but after that, he vanished. I thought he was dead." His gaze flickered to Naomi. "Until your trial. Until Reynolds pulled his name out of nowhere." Elijah muttered a curse under his breath. Naomi's mind raced. If Brooks was alive, he'd been in hiding for a decade. And if Reynolds used his name... "Reynolds doesn't know where he is either," Naomi realized. Owen nodded. "But he's trying to find him, and if you keep making noise, you're going to lead him straight to him." Elijah ran a hand down his face. "This just keeps getting worse." Naomi exhaled. "You said someone was coming for us. Who?" Owen hesitated. "Reynolds has a cleaner. Name's Carter Hayes." Naomi frowned. "Never heard of him." Owen's voice turned grim. "That's the point." Elijah stiffened. "And let me guess, this guy doesn't bring people in alive." Owen's silence was the only answer they needed. Naomi's pulse quickened. "Where do we go?" Owen exhaled. "There's a contact of Brooks's outside of town, someone who might know where he went. If you're lucky, you'll get there before Hayes finds you." Elijah shook his head. "Yeah, because luck has worked out great for us so far." Owen pulled a crumpled note from his pocket and handed it to Naomi. An address. "Leave now," he said, "and ditch your car before morning." Naomi stared at the address. This was it, the closest they'd ever been. She looked up. "Why are you helping us?" Owen's jaw clenched. "Because I should have helped Brooks sooner." He turned, heading for the door. Naomi stepped forward. "Wait." But when she reached the hallway, Owen was already gone. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. Elijah sighed. "This is a bad idea." Naomi looked down at the note in her hands. Maybe. She shoved it into her pocket, but it's the only one we've got. She grabbed their bags. Elijah groaned but followed. Within minutes, they were back on the road, the motel shrinking in the distance. Naomi gripped the wheel, her mind replaying Owen's warning. Carter Hayes. A name she'd never heard before, but one she was about to meet. The night stretched ahead in an unbroken line of dark asphalt and distant headlights. Naomi Carter kept her hands firm on the wheel, the note Owen had given her burning a hole in her pocket. Elijah sat beside her, silent for once, his fingers tapping against his knee in restless rhythm. Neither of them spoke about what they were really thinking. That Owen might have just sent them into another trap. That Carter Hayes, whoever he was, might already be waiting for them. That Nathaniel Brooks might not even be alive. Elijah finally broke the silence. What's the plan when we get there? Naomi exhaled. Find this contact, see if they know where Brooks is. Elijah rubbed a hand down his face. And if they don't? Naomi didn't answer. She didn't have one. The gas station they pulled into was old, the neon sign half burnt out. Naomi parked near the edge of the lot, scanning the area. No cars except for a dusty pickup by the entrance. The convenience store's lights flickered, but the inside was empty. She killed the engine. Fill the tank. I'll grab food. Elijah hesitated. Naomi? She looked at him. We don't have time to argue. Elijah sighed but grabbed the pump. Naomi stepped into the store. The old bell above the door jingled, but no one was behind the counter. Shelves half-stocked with stale snacks stretched along the dimly lit space. A small TV buzzed in the corner, playing static. She grabbed a few protein bars and bottled water, moving quickly. Something about the place made her uneasy. Then she saw it. The convex mirror in the corner. A reflection that wasn't hers. A man, standing at the back of the store, half hidden by a row of canned goods. Watching her. Her stomach flipped. She didn't look at him directly, didn't react. Instead, she grabbed a pack of gum, casually moving toward the counter. The man moved too. Closer. Naomi's fingers curled around a bottle of soda. If he got any nearer, she'd swing first and ask questions later. A low voice came from behind her. You don't belong here. She turned. The man wasn't huge, but he didn't need to be. He carried himself like someone who knew exactly how to break a person in half. His jacket was worn, boots scuffed, but his eyes were sharp, calculated. Naomi's heart pounded. You Carter Hayes? The man's expression didn't change. You need to leave. She tightened her grip on the soda. Not until I get what I came for. Hayes exhaled, almost amused. You think you're here for answers? He took another step closer. You're walking into a dead end, kid. Naomi didn't blink. Then why are you here? He smiled. It wasn't friendly. To clean up loose ends. Her pulse spiked. The door behind her creaked open. Elijah. Hayes' eyes flicked past her just for a second. It was enough. Naomi moved. She swung the soda bottle hard, slamming it into his ribs. Hayes grunted, but barely stumbled. She grabbed a rack of candy bars and shoved it forward, knocking over the shelves between them. Elijah, run! Elijah didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted back toward the car. Naomi bolted after him, her breath burning in her throat. Behind her, metal clattered as Hayes shoved the shelves aside. She hit the door at full speed, bursting into the cold night air. Elijah was already in the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life. Naomi threw herself into the car just as Hayes stepped out of the store, eyes locked onto her. Elijah floored it. Tires screeched. The car fishtailed onto the road, speedometer climbing. Naomi twisted in her seat. Hayes didn't chase them. He didn't have to. He was already dialing a number. She faced forward, gripping the dashboard. He's not working alone. Elijah's knuckles were white on the wheel. No kidding. Naomi swallowed hard. Keep driving. They weren't safe yet. And whoever had just been on the other end of that call, they were already coming. The road stretched ahead, endless and dark, the hum of the engine filling the silence between them. Naomi Carter sat stiff in the passenger seat, her pulse still racing from the gas station. Elijah's grip on the wheel was tight, his knuckles white as they sped through the deserted highway. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Elijah finally exhaled. So just to recap, Carter Hayes is hunting us. Brooks is a ghost, and we still have no idea who's actually pulling the strings. Naomi swallowed hard. Pretty much. Elijah let out a hollow laugh. Great. The crumpled note in Naomi's pocket felt heavier than it should. Owen had given them this address, promising it would lead them closer to Brooks. But after tonight, Naomi wasn't sure if they were following a lead or walking straight into another trap. The GPS on the burner phone beeped. "Turn left in 2 miles," a robotic voice instructed. Naomi glanced at the screen. Almost there. Elijah's jaw tightened. Let's hope this guy's not another hitman. The road narrowed, trees closing in on both sides. There were no streetlights, just the glow of their high beams cutting through the darkness. A small wooden sign finally appeared at the turnoff. Dawson Creek. Naomi inhaled sharply. This is it. Elijah slowed as they approached a worn-down cabin at the end of a dirt road. A single light flickered on the porch. No cars. No movement. They parked a few yards away. Elijah turned to her. "If this goes sideways, I know." Naomi's fingers hovered over the door handle. "Be ready." They stepped out. The air was thick with damp earth and pine, the silence almost suffocating. Naomi approached the cabin, her heart pounding. She knocked twice. Nothing. She knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. Elijah shifted beside her. "I don't like this." Naomi didn't either. But they had come too far to walk away now. She reached for the door handle. It twisted before she could touch it. The door creaked open just an inch, revealing a pair of tired, wary eyes. An old man, gaunt and weathered, stood in the doorway. His gaze flicked between them, filled with something Naomi couldn't quite place. Recognition, maybe, or fear. Naomi's throat tightened. "Are you Nathaniel Brooks?" The man didn't answer. Then a gunshot rang out. Naomi barely had time to react before Elijah yanked her down. The bullet shattered the wooden railing behind them. "Go," he shouted. They scrambled toward the car, but headlights flooded the trees. 2 black SUVs roared down the dirt road, tires kicking up dust. Naomi's stomach dropped. "Haze," Elijah cursed. "We're boxed in." Brooks moved faster than expected for a man his age. He grabbed Naomi's wrist, pulling her inside. "In here. Now." She didn't hesitate. Elijah dove in after her, slamming the door shut just as another bullet cracked against the cabin wall. Brooks locked the door, then turned sharply. "You shouldn't have come here." Naomi's chest heaved. "You're alive?" Brooks gave a bitter chuckle. "Not for much longer if you don't shut up and listen." Outside, voices barked orders. Boots crunched against gravel. Naomi forced herself to focus. "Reynolds is hunting you," Brooks scoffed. "Reynolds is a pawn." Naomi froze. "What?" Brooks moved quickly, grabbing a duffel bag from the floor. He shoved a stack of documents into Naomi's hands. "You want the truth? Take this and run." Elijah peered through the window. "We don't have time for riddles, old man." Brooks zipped the bag shut. "Reynolds answers to someone bigger. Someone who's been burying cases like mine for years." His voice dropped lower. "You expose this, and you don't just take down Reynolds. You burn the whole system." Naomi's fingers tightened around the papers. She had started this journey just trying to clear her name. Now she had the chance to bring everything crashing down. The front door shuddered as someone slammed into it. Brooks grabbed a shotgun from behind the couch. "You two get out the back. I'll buy you time." Naomi's pulse spiked. "You'll get killed." Brooks didn't flinch. "I've been dead for 10 years. Go." The door buckled. Naomi turned, her mind screaming at her to fight, to stay, to do something. But Elijah grabbed her hand, dragging her toward the back exit. They burst into the trees just as the cabin door caved in. Gunfire erupted behind them. Naomi ran. Branches whipped against her arms, her legs burning as she pushed forward. Elijah was right beside her, breath ragged, gripping the stolen documents like a lifeline. The headlights from the SUVs flickered through the trees. Shouts echoed in the night. Naomi didn't know where they were running to. She just knew they couldn't stop. Because now they weren't just witnesses. They were holding the truth. And the people in power, they'd do anything to bury it.